Have you ever felt it? That subtle, gnawing sense that you're a pawn in a game you don't remember agreeing to play. You look at your hands, and they are clean. You look at your life, and it feels normal. But deep within the quietest chambers of your soul, a whisper persists, telling you that you are on a battlefield. This isn't a premonition, it's a memory of the present moment. Because the most profound and pervasive war in human history is not being fought in trenches or with drones in the sky. It is being fought within the sacred, silent sanctuary of your mind. It is a war for your perception, a battle for your belief, a siege against your very soul. You did not enlist, you were not conscripted, you were not handed a rifle, you were born into it. And the most terrifying part? The architects of this war are counting on you, never realizing you are their most valuable soldier. If you feel this truth resonating in your bones, if this message feels like a divine echo of your own unspoken thoughts, know that you are not alone. Your awakening is a part of a greater cosmic shift. Acknowledge this frequency by letting your presence be known. Like this message, subscribe to the truth, and share in the comments what you have been feeling. Write, "I am awake," to connect with the others who are beginning to see. This war is insidious because its invasion is silent, its weapons invisible. You didn't march into a war zone. The war zone was marched into you, downloaded into your consciousness, byte by byte, post by post. You didn't sign up for this conflict with a pen, but with every mindless scroll, every unexamined click, every silent nod of agreement. You didn't put on a uniform of camouflage and steel, but you wear its modern equivalent every day, the carefully curated identity you present to the world, an identity shaped not by your deepest truths, but by the prevailing currents of your digital tribe. And yet, make no mistake, you were already on the battlefield long before you heard these words. This is a war fought not with guns, but with silence. Not with bullets, but with beliefs. Not with bombs, but with the subtle, relentless programming of your attention. And the most chilling, the most terrifying part of this entire divine drama. For so long, you did not even notice. You couldn't. Because the warfare of today is not announced with blaring sirens and declarations from on high. It's not a sudden cataclysm. It's a slow, methodical installation. It is installed in your feed, that endless river of curated outrage and fleeting joy. It is installed in your fear, the primal, ancient fear of being cast out, of being wrong, of being alone. It is installed in your silence, the most potent weapon of all, the quiet consent that allows entire realities to be built on foundations of deception. You were never forced to pick a side in the way your ancestors were. You were gently, almost lovingly, programmed to. You were handed a pre-packaged enemy, complete with headlines that told you who to hate, language that taught you who to fear, and algorithms that meticulously shaped what you see, and more importantly, what you never ever question. With every scroll, with every passive glance, a seed was planted. Every time you stayed quiet when your soul screamed for you to speak, every time you scrolled past the image of a bombing, a burning building, a broken city, simply because it was not your side, not your problem, you became the perfect soldier they needed. Not a rebel, not a monster, but something far more useful, far more powerful, just obedient. The philosopher Hannah Arendt, a soul who stared into the abyss of human action, gave this phenomenon a name that should echo through the corridors of our modern world: the banality of evil. Her divine insight was that evil, in its most catastrophic forms, does not always look grand or dramatic. It doesn't always wear a horned mask and cackle in the shadows. More often, it looks normal. It looks like paperwork. It looks like procedure. It looks like politeness. Because the greatest, most soul-crushing atrocities in the history of this planet were never committed by monsters alone. They were enabled, they were executed, they were committed by people who followed the rules. People who filled out the forms, who nodded when they were told to, who clocked in and clocked out, and who outsourced their conscience to the system. And maybe, just maybe, you have been nodding too. Maybe you did not know that not choosing is still a choice. Maybe you did not realize that staying neutral in a universe that is constantly moving and creating, still feeds aside. And perhaps the most dangerous weapon in this entire war is your own incredible ability, your own divinely human capacity to keep living, to keep scrolling, to keep planning your weekend, as if it is not happening at all. So, before we talk about the wars out there, the ones on the news, let's talk about the war in here, the one raging inside your mind. How did it get there? Who put it there? And why does obedience no longer feel like fear anymore? Why does it feel like comfort? But understand this, that feeling is a divine illusion. Comfort is not freedom. It is programming. It is the golden cage. And the ones who programmed you, the unseen architects of these systems, are counting on you, never, ever realizing it. This war did not begin with an explosion. It began with a suggestion. It began with a headline, a post, a shared opinion that you did not question because it felt right, it felt safe, it felt like home. It began with a silence you thought was neutral, a passivity you mistook for peace. No boots on the ground, no borders to cross, just minds slowly shifting, ideas slowly aligning, and fears slowly justifying the unthinkable. The modern war is not fought with tanks anymore. It is fought with perception. And perception is a delicate thing, planted not through brute violence, but through repetition. Not with hard evidence, but with raw emotion. Not by forcing you to think, but by keeping you so perpetually distracted, so overstimulated, so exhausted, that you are unable to think at all. You were not asked to join this army. You were absorbed into it. You were absorbed while you were laughing at memes, scrolling through trends, numbing your senses with an endless barrage of content designed to keep you from feeling the deep, unsettling truth of what is truly happening. While you were distracted, someone, something, was installing beliefs into the fertile ground of your subconscious, softly, strategically, relentlessly. They were not looking for fighters, they were looking for followers, not angry ones, but silent ones. Because in this war, this new kind of war, silence is loyalty, and loyalty is obedience. And obedience is everything. You didn't notice when the simple act of asking questions became dangerous. You didn't notice when nuance, the beautiful gray area where wisdom resides, became an act of betrayal. You didn't notice when thinking for yourself became synonymous with picking the wrong side. So you stayed out of it. You chose the comfort of the middle ground. And that very choice was your enlistment. This war does not need your permission to rage. It only needs your passivity to win. And if you are sitting there right now thinking, I'm not involved, I don't care about politics, I just want peace, then congratulations. That is exactly the mindset they engineered. That is the frequency of compliance. Because in their world, peace has been redefined. It is no longer about justice or truth or empathy. It has been redefined as your willingness to just keep scrolling. This is not a war with battlefields. It is a war with belief systems. And the people who win are not the loudest or the strongest or the most righteous. They are the ones who quietly, subtly, convinced you to stop thinking altogether. You did not put on a helmet, but they gave you one anyway. A helmet made of opinions you never truly formed, fears you never truly examined, and narratives you never truly questioned. And now, you wear it proudly, defending ideas that are not yours, fighting wars you don't truly understand, and attacking those whose only crime is their refusal to obey. That's not freedom. That's programming. And the scariest part? You were never asked to think, just to conform. The front lines are not on the news, they are inside your consciousness. And the moment you surrendered your critical thought was the moment you were drafted. Think of the man Adolf Eichmann. He was not a frothing, monstrous beast. He did not scream orders with fire in his eyes. He did not torture anyone with his own two hands. He did not burn villages, bomb cities, or personally march children to their deaths. He filed papers. He followed procedure. He sat at a desk and, when finally held accountable for his role in orchestrating the Holocaust, His defense was simple, chilling, and profoundly revealing. I was just doing my job. When Hannah Arendt watched his trial in Jerusalem in 1961, she expected to see a devil, a psychopath, a sadist. But what she saw was horrifyingly worse. She saw a man who looked ordinary, polite, well-groomed, empty. He was not driven by a volcanic hatred. He was driven by a quiet, meticulous obedience. And that is when Arendt gave the world a phrase that should haunt our philosophy forever: the banality of evil. Evil, she realized, does not always come from rage or rebellion. It does not always wear a uniform or wave a flag. Sometimes it doesn't look like evil at all. Sometimes it looks like paperwork. It looks like procedure. It looks like politeness. It looks like a man who never once asked if what he was doing was right, only if he was doing it correctly. Because evil spreads not through passion, but through passivity. It grows in the soil of thoughtlessness. It thrives when people stop thinking, when they follow systems without question, when they protect their personal comfort over their divine conscience. And that's what scared Arendt the most. Not the monsters, but the mediocrity. Not the fanatics, but the functionaries. As she wrote, "The sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil. They just go along with it. They normalize the unacceptable. They dilute their responsibility into the collective. They outsource their morality to whatever system they are in, and they convince themselves, 'I didn't know. I did not mean to. I did not choose this.' But the deep spiritual truth is, you don't need to choose evil to become part of it. You just need to stop choosing at all. And if you think this is only about history, about Nazis, dictators, or long-dead regimes, you are missing the divine point. You are missing the warning that echoes through time. Because the same psychology, the same spiritual trap that Arendt warned us about, is alive and pulsing right now in how we justify what our side does. It's alive in how we dismiss civilian deaths as collateral damage. It's alive in how we silence our own empathy with labels and hashtags. It's alive in how we nod along because everyone else is nodding too. You don't have to be evil to support evil. You just have to stop asking questions. And that is what Arendt saw. A world not of villains, but of vacant minds. Obedient, efficient, dangerously normal. And if we don't learn to recognize that pattern in ourselves, in our feeds, in our own quiet moments of conformity, we don't just repeat history, we become it. You probably don't think of yourself as obedient. You think of yourself as open-minded, neutral, balanced. But obedience doesn't always look like kneeling. Sometimes it looks like comfort. This is the first great trap: comfort over truth. The divine truth is almost always uncomfortable. It demands action. It breaks your rhythm. It threatens the carefully constructed image you've built of yourself as a good, rational, moral person. So, instead of facing that truth, you choose ease. You scroll past the airstrike. You mute the screaming mother. You avoid the footage because it's too much. But it's not too much. It's just too real. And comfort is seductive. It whispers, "You're already doing enough." It tells you, "This isn't your problem." It hands you a clean conscience for the price of your silence. But truth doesn't disappear when you avoid it. It festers, and eventually it turns into something worse: normalization. Because once you get used to atrocity, you stop recognizing it as atrocity. The second trap is even more primal. Group belonging is greater than critical thinking. There is something ancient in you, a divine spark of tribal connection. It's the need to belong, to be part of something larger than yourself. But in this modern war, that sacred need has been weaponized. It is louder than logic. You don't post what you truly think. You post what will protect your image within your tribe. You share what your circle agrees with. You say the right thing, not the honest thing. Because saying the wrong thing gets you exiled, and you are not alone in this. Most people don't form their beliefs from truth anymore. They form them from loyalty. Loyalty to their country, to their culture, to their ideology, to their curated digital tribe. You think you're thinking, but you're just defending your side. And the programming is simple. Your side can do no wrong, and their side can do no right. That is not awareness, that is programming. Arendt warned us that the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the dedicated communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction no longer exists. And that distinction is erased not by force, but by the fear of not fitting in. This leads to the third trap, silence as survival. There comes a point where speaking the truth becomes dangerous, where saying what you believe makes you a target, where nuance becomes betrayal, where simply asking questions gets you labeled unpatriotic, insensitive, naive, dangerous. So, you stop speaking. You stop thinking out loud. You watch the world break, and you stay quiet, because everyone else is quiet. But silence isn't safety, it is complicity. Every war needs two kinds of people, those who fight and those who stay silent while others are killed. And while you may not be dropping the bombs, your silence is making them invisible. You obey every single day without realizing it. You obey when you repost the flag, not because you feel a surge of genuine care, but because it's expected. You obey when you ignore the destruction, because it challenges your pre-existing bias. You obey when you justify what your side did, even when it was unjustifiable. You obey when you choose comfort over confrontation, group over truth, and silence over risk. It doesn't look like obedience. It looks like normal life. But that is exactly the point. This is how obedience survives and thrives, not with guns pointed at your head, but with 1,000 tiny compromises, 1,000 quiet nods, 1,000 clicks of approval. And every time you choose the easy path over the honest one, you become a part of the machine. Not because you're evil, but because you're afraid. You think your opinions are yours, but how many of them were planted there, gently, over time? You weren't handed a weapon, you were handed a story. And that story came wrapped in two things, a clearly defined enemy and a divinely appointed hero. Not chosen by you, but curated for you. Look closely. Every time a conflict breaks out, the same formula appears. One side is defending truth, justice, and freedom. The other side is evil, chaotic, and inhuman. One death is a tragedy, another death is a necessary sacrifice. The camera doesn't just show you violence, it tells you how to feel about it. A crying child on one side is a victim. A crying child on the other side is a casualty of war. Same pain, different narrative. This isn't journalism, it's emotional architecture. It's not telling you what happened, it's telling you what to believe. And that belief becomes your badge of belonging. You repost the approved flag, you echo the correct phrase, you hold the right outrage. But what you're doing isn't thinking, it's aligning, it's obeying. The words themselves become the weapons. Invasion becomes intervention. Civilians become human shields. Torture becomes enhanced interrogation. Massacre becomes collateral damage. These phrases are not accidents. They are linguistic sedatives. They are designed to dull your outrage, to distance your empathy. They let you sleep at night while others bleed, because if you called it what it is, you would be forced to care, and caring is dangerous. It disrupts the illusion of normal. It breaks the spell of compliance, so they don't just feed you facts, they feed you a language that makes complicity feel clean, that makes obedience feel like wisdom. Then comes the algorithm. You think you're exploring the world, but you're being looped, fed the same outrage, the same side, the same version of the truth, over and over again. It learns your fears, your tribal reflexes, your ever-shrinking attention span, and then it traps you inside a thought loop. You see your views reflected everywhere, and you feel certain. You feel moral. You feel right. But what you're really feeling is controlled. Because if you only ever see what you already believe, you're not being informed, you're being programmed. And that's the brilliance of this modern manipulation. You're not forced to obey, you're nudged. You're fed the right outrage, the safe empathy, the approved doubt. And you think that's freedom, when really, it's consent without awareness. Hannah Arendt warned that evil thrives not when people choose it, but when they stop choosing altogether. And that's what this is. This is not mass conspiracy. This is not mind control in the old sense. This is millions of people being slowly, gently taught to obey without ever being asked to. You weren't programmed by accident. You were programmed because obedient people don't interrupt the system. And the system doesn't care what you think, as long as you think what it gave you. At some point, this obedience stops feeling like a decision. It becomes a rhythm, a reflex, a setting that was flipped on long ago and never turned off. You don't remember when it happened. You just woke up one day and realized you'd stopped thinking for yourself. Not because you became evil, but because you became efficient. Because it's easier to obey the structure than to confront what the structure creates. You repost the right content, you stay silent at the right times, you echo the right outrage, and none of it feels forced. It feels normal. That is the trick. The system doesn't want your defiance. It doesn't even want your belief. It just wants your automatic compliance. And the more automated you become, the more your moral responsibility slips away. You're not choosing anymore, you're reacting. And reactions don't carry guilt because they feel like instinct. But instinct can be programmed, and yours already has been. So where did your moral compass go? You handed it over. You gave it to the group, to the cause, to the party, to the platform, to the leader who said the words that made you feel safe. And once that happens, you stop asking what's right. You only ask what's allowed. What's trending? What will get me attacked? What will keep me protected? And somewhere along that line, morality became delegation. You stopped checking your conscience because you assumed someone else was doing it for you. But morality doesn't work like that. It requires presence, tension, and individual responsibility. When you remove those, you remove yourself from the consequences of the world, and that's when evil becomes systemic. Not because no one knew, but because no one asked. Hannah Arendt watched this happen in real time. Ordinary men and women slowly handing over their conscience in exchange for protection, promotion, and belonging. And when asked how it happened, how good people became part of genocide, she didn't talk about ideology, she talked about thoughtlessness. It was not stupidity, but a curious, quite authentic inability to think, not an inability to know, but to think, to stop, to reflect, to ask why, and to sit with the discomfort. Because evil doesn't need hatred, it just needs numbness. And thoughtlessness is the perfect fuel, efficient, polite, deadly. So ask yourself, are you making choices, or are you just following settings that were installed before you were even aware of them? Because you don't need a gun in your hand to be dangerous. Sometimes, all it takes is a brain on autopilot. They will tell you that silence is noble, that staying out of it is mature, that not choosing sides means you're above the chaos. But silence is not neutral. It's not peace. It's not wisdom. Silence is participation. Wars are not built by warriors alone. They are built by bystanders, by people who did not speak up, did not challenge, did not interrupt the lie. Because silence does not just ignore violence, it protects it, it shields it from scrutiny, it gives it time, space, and permission. And the longer you stay quiet, the more you become the perfect citizen, obedient, undisturbed, and complicit. You think you're staying out of it, but what you're really doing is making sure it never stops, because the greatest enablers of evil aren't those who shout in support, they're the ones who say nothing at all. The ones who watch homes turn to rubble and say, "It's complicated." The ones who hear screams and ask, "But what about the context?" The ones who see a child under the wreckage and scroll past because it doesn't fit their feed, their side, their comfort, and history is full of them. Ordinary men and women who believed that silence kept them safe, that staying quiet meant staying clean, that doing nothing was somehow better than doing wrong. But doing nothing is doing something. Arendt saw it over and over, how people allowed horror to happen not because they hated, but because they refused to be disturbed. And in refusing to be disturbed, they became the very foundation upon which evil stood. Because you cannot build a regime without silence. You cannot kill conscience unless the crowd agrees to look away. And that's what most people do. They don't light the fire. They just refuse to notice the smoke. So ask yourself, what are you looking away from today? What silence are you calling balance? What truths are you hiding behind the veil of neutrality? Because in times like these, silence doesn't make you safe. It just makes you next. You were trained to obey without knowing, conditioned to conform without asking, and programmed to believe that comfort is safety. But here's the truth your soul has been waiting to hear. Awareness is resistance. Not guns, not slogans, not loud declarations of war. Just awareness, sharp, quiet, and uncompromising. Because the most dangerous system isn't the one that controls your actions. It's the one that controls your attention. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. They told you not to think too much, that asking questions makes you divisive, that speaking out makes you unstable, that nuance is dangerous. They convinced you that obedience was maturity, that doubt was betrayal, that silence was strength. But now you know. You know that critical thinking is rebellion. It is the sacred act of stopping the scroll and starting to see. It is the courage to ask whose voice is missing. It is the divine responsibility to wonder what you are truly being shown and what you are being shielded from. That's how rebellion begins. Not in rage, not in protest, but in the simple, powerful refusal to nod along mindlessly. You don't need to fight with weapons. You fight by refusing to be unconscious. You fight by staying awake when the world begs you to sleep. You fight by thinking when everyone else has outsourced their thought to their tribe.